Karateho Matata. Welcome again back to the Didaskalon. Temaran to tetartan kai dekatan alpha. Biblion onomate Athenaze anagnosamai. So today, Temaran to tetartan kai dekatan, the 14th Alpha Biblion book, or Alpha, if you don't like the aspirated 5. Alpha Biblion, the 14th book, Alpha of book named onomate, dative, with the name Athenaze. So Athenaze, we will read anagnosomai, I will read. So anagnosometa, we will read. So special treat today for you have seen the movie 300 or the 300 Rise of an Empire. This chapter sort of represents part of that movie with the Battle of Thermopylae. So the Heian Tais Thermopylaes Make, the battle in the Hot Gates, is what it really means, or the Battle of Thermopylae is how it's translated. So we have the 300 Spartans, the Hoi Lacedaemonioi. The Hoi Lacedaemonioi. We have Leonidas, Ho Leonides. We have Xerxes, Ho Xerxes. And in Rise of an Empire we have He Artemisia, or Queen Artemisia, from Halicarnassus, which is actually Bodrum today in Turkey. But Halicarnassus is still there. Halicarnassus, you can see walls which are conveniently right next to a hotel. So you can stay in a hotel and swim and look at the walls that Alexander the Great came through when he took Halicarnassus. There's also a stadium there, and also the famous tomb, one of the 7 wonders of the world. It's the base of the tomb is there, parts of it, but most of it was destroyed by an earthquake. So en tais thermopylaes, he en tais thermopylaes make, and that's also written here. So we have a Greek soldier battling a Persian barbarians, as they were known, Ho Barbaroi. That term is not used in the sense maybe as we would know it today, as maybe someone from Northern Europe carrying a big axe and having a long beard. It just meant anyone who didn't speak Greek. So even though the Persians were actually very cultured, it wasn't a slight to their culture, it was because they didn't speak Greek. But now that term's used sort of as a derogatory term. You may or may not already know that, but they call them barbaroi, or hoi barbaroi, because they went bar when they spoke. Again, that's where we get our term barbarian from, but they were not barbarians. In fact, most barbarians weren't really barbarians. They were all cultured in their own way, as you may already know. So hoi Hellenes, Andreotata, Makomeneoi, tous barbarus hemunon. So ho Hellenes, Andreotata, Makomenoi, tous barbarus hemunon. So that's the subject, and you know the verb is way over here. This is an imperfect form. You know that because one, it has the secondary ending on. It has an augment, he. And the way you figure that out is you would look at the first at the ending, because there's no other verb here. So you know it's imperfect. You may say, well, how do you know it's not aorist? It could be a second aorist verb. That is possible. You would have to look for a verb that is augmented. Say it would either be alpha or epsilon. It would have a mu after it. So it is possible. It could also be another. It could even be eta. So eta mu. So verb. You would have to look for the present tense of this verb, and you would find that we already learned a verb that means to check or to hold back, ward off. So that verb we've already learned, and just to look it up very quickly, so it starts with an alpha or alpa, and that verb is amuno, and this future is amuno, or actually it's amuneo, but then it contracts to amuno, and then we have he muna. That's the aorist. So the aorist is he muna, which is actually an asigmatic aorist. So you know this is not the aorist form because it ends in on. It's not a second aorist because it has alpha. So this has to be an imperfect. And usually, of course, in this book, you're going to learn verbs. We're not going to throw new verbs at you that you don't know, very rarely, unless it's cited at the bottom of the text that you're reading. So, but just as practice, if you were to come across this in your reading of a text and you had not learned the verb, you would have to figure it out this way by understanding how it was augmented. Because basically this could be a second aorist, and you would have to figure out that it's not. So it was word holding back, or were checking back, or were warding off the barbarians. So that's the accusative. And then you're wondering what these are. So this is actually a form you'll learn in this chapter. This is a superlative form of an adverb. So this is we're most brave, we're fighting most bravely. So this is the adjective brave, and when it has this form at the end, which is a neuter plural ending, it means it's an adjective. It's plural because it's just the superlative, and it's saying they're fighting most bravely. This is fighting, a participle. Of course, this is first person plural, because it agrees with hoi Hellenes. So the Greeks fighting bravely, warded off, were warding off, tous barbarus. So in English, it could be two sentences. The Greeks fought bravely, or were fighting bravely, and warded off the barbarians. That's one way you could split it. Or you could say the Greeks fighting bravely were warding off the barbarians. Vocabulary: alpizzo, alpio. And the best way to learn these, if you learn Attic Greek first, which is what most people learn, and this is Attic Greek you're learning now, this is very confusing, and you're like, how do you tell the difference? Sometimes it's the same as the present tense. And they list the stem here. The stem is actually alpie, and it would be LPEO. Actually, it was LPSO, and eventually it was dropped, the sigma, because you would have an epsilon, a sigma, which is the future, and then O. So LPSO, and they just didn't like the sigma between vowels, and then you would get this epsilon with the omega, and that just contracts. And the reason this is as an accent circumflex is that if you were to add an omega here, right, your accent would automatically fall here because it's recessive, and then this is long, so it brings the accent, which would be here, to the penult. The ultima is long, omega, and that's always like here. It's brought here. It would be here, but this is long, so it brings the accent here, so it goes as far back as it can. So the accent's here, and when it contracts, then that circumflex that accent sort of goes over both of them, and that's why you get this. You get the circumflex. At least that's how I remember it. But if you learn Homer, you know that this is how the word was originally. Actually, sometimes it's even written this way in Homer, depending on the verb. But you see it better. You know why it's LPO, because you know there's a loss of a sigma and a contraction. So then when you get to the aorist, it's LP. That's the stem, and of course you augment it. So A, L, P. It's hard for us to pronounce a long eta in front of a lambda, so L Pisa, and this is just the aorist sigma alpha added on. So the stem is P, and augmented L Pisa. So epipempo, epipempso, sigma is embedded in that pi. Psi becomes psi, or psi. So the sigma is there, it's like a contraction. Becomes the psi. Then apempsa, same thing here. Procto, proxo, aproxa. Again, a chi and a sigma are coming together. And that makes the x, or actually, sorry, kappa, my fault. Kappa and a sigma makes the x sound, so you get xi. There's the stem, so that's how you know that. Proc, and you get proxo, and then it becomes proxo. A proxa. And you remember the participle in the aorist loses the augment, so you get proxas, or epipempsas. Instead of epipempsa, it's epipempsa, so don't forget that it becomes unaugmented. Prospalo. Here's the future stem, bale, so you would expect balo, so prospalo. And of course in English this would be really hard to distinguish prosbalo and prosbalo. The only way is by trying to stress the accent. Prosbalo, prosbalo. But that's the challenge in ancient Greek, and for all of us speaking it, trying to speak it. Maybe Greek speakers today would be able to do that, but it's quite difficult, so you could try to emphasize it again. Prosbalo, prospalo, and then prosebalon, prosebalon, sumbalo, sumbalo, sunebalon, Soon erkomai, soon Amy, soon eltan. And this is really, think of just as erkomai, and Amy. This is Amy Ebo, I will go, not Amy Sum, I am. If you know your Latin, they'll say Amy Ebo. Ebo is I will go. Amy Sum, Sum is I am. So you know it's because in English it's pretty much pronounced Amy, Amy. It's hard for us to distinguish an accent, and as much as I try to do it, I'm not as good as I would like, but this is what we're forced with. So in speaking it, if you may have to make a point saying, if you're speaking Greek, say Amy Didaskalos, ho Didaskalos Amy, I am the Didaskalos. That would make sense. You know it means that. If you say I will go and you say ho Didaskalos, that wouldn't make any sense. So sometimes context will help. So this is soon with tacked on to erkomai, soon with Amy, soon eltan. I come together. Kraomai. And just there's a note here. It is written differently in the imperfect and present forms. There's an eta where alpha would be expected, so you have chromai, crei, cretai, etc. In those forms. So you have chromai, crei, cretai, chrometa, creste, chrontai. That's the present, and then the infinitive and participle is krestai and chromenos. The imperfect indicative is ekromen, ekro, not ekru, ekreto, ekrometa, ekreste, ekronto. So it's an irregular verb. This is the aorist, it's a kresamen. Again, normally after a row you would see alpha, and again it's eta in this case. You know this is aorist because it has a sigma and an alpha and an augment. Kresomai is the future. Somai. You know it's not aorist because it has an omega. Aorist is always indicated by alpha unless it's a second aorist. Nouns. Ho haplites, tu haplitu. To pletos, tu pletus. Hostolos, tu stolu. Hostratiotes, tu stratiotu. Hostratos, tu stratu. Think of strategic. To understand this word, the strategy, strategic. That's where we get that word from, strategy, strategic, stratos, and armies, hostratos. Adjectives, oligos, olige, oligon. Hutos, hate, tuto. This, these. This is a very important adjective to know. It has some multiple forms, but try to work those out. And it's always in the predicate position, meaning it stands outside the article. So tuto to epigramma, or to epigramma tuto, this inscription. So it's never in the attributed position. Stenos, stene, stenon. We know that's narrow, like a stent that's put into a narrow passage in a heart bypass. So stenos, stene, stenon. Ta stena, narrows. This is used like a then. You'll see that. So look at the accent. It's not an article. It's not he. It's e. So again, the accent will determine. That's why it's important to know the accents as much as possible. You have en mesoi, or if you don't like the iota, en meso, en mesoia, en mesoi, or en meso. So in between. Katagain, by land. Proper names: ho Hellene, tous Hellenos. He Euboia, tes Euboias. I'm going to do this again because there was some noises. So en mesoi, en mesoi, en meso. Katagain, ho Hellene, tu Hellenos. Hellenos. He, so there's the he, not the e. He Euboia, tes Euboias. Or you could say he Euboia, tes Euboias. Hi Thermopylae, ton Thermopylon. He Corinthos, tes Corinthu. Or he Corinthos, tes Corinthu. Hoi Lacedaemonioi, ton Lacedaemonion. Ho Leonidas, or ho Leonidas, tu Leonidu, or Nidu, Leonidas. Ho Xerxes, tu Xerxu, hoi Persai, ton Person. This is a statue commemorating Thermopylae in Greece, the Spartans. Hoi Lacedaemonioi. Epi ho Xerxes, basileus on ton person, ton stolon paraskeuadzen, en noi en kon, passon ten halada, katastrepsastai, hoiton Hellenon protoi, sunelthon, estain Corinthon kai escopun, tide pratain, polun de chronon, e porun, medzanagar straton, e ken ho Xerxes, e pantes hoi Hellenes, kai pleonas naus, telos de, e doxen altois, tus barbarus, amunein, en tais Thermopylais, eke gar katamen gain, ta ore, huto prosketai, tei thalatei, or te thalate. Hoste, oligoi pros polus, dunantai makesta, katade thalatan, poroi, si stenoi en mesoi tes te euboias, kai tes e peru. Mathantes hoi Athenaze, hoti Xerxes ede prostein halada poru etai, kai dialigu estas thermopilas, hoi persai affixantai, ton Leonidain e pempsan, basileia onta ton lacedaemonion, hepta kiscilius, econta hoplitas, hutoi de afficonomenoi, estas thermopilas paraskelatsanto amunein tus barbarus te heladi. So again, a lot of participles and some new vocabulary and some comparatives and superlative adjectives and some numbers. Again, some of these are glossed, so always check down here for words you don't know. So when, epi ho Xerxes. So you have your subject, and now you have something which is describing that subject. So this basileus, this is in apposition to Xerxes, so it's a nominative form, basileus. So it's saying when Xerxes, king, being king, so on also tells you that on is really referring to Xerxes. Him being king is really what it's saying, or being king. You have your genitive of possession of who, of whom, of the Persians. He's king of the Persians. Basileus on ton person. Okay, so what is he doing? There has to be a verb. Here's the verb. Paraskeutadzen. It ends in en, epsilon nu, and that is a clue to tell you that it could be imperfect, and you can look for an augment, and here it is. It's in between the suffix para, skeladzo, and you have to look for the augment here. So this is when Xerxes was preparing. Paraskeladzen. This is third person imperfect, augmented, so it's definitely imperfect. Remember, the imperfect looks like the present, but it has an augment and has a different ending. It's a secondary ending. It has a movable nu, and this nu is here because there's a vowel here, but it could not have the nu. It could also look like that. So be prepared to see it this way as well. So when Xerxes was preparing something, what was he preparing? The ton stolon. That's army, as you know from the vocabulary. Enoi ekon. So this is a idiomatic phrase meaning to have in mind. So it's in mind, inside your mind, to have in mind. This is a participle again, it has on, you know it's present, so it's referring back to Xerxes. So having in mind, so while or when, this can be translated different ways. While when Xerxes, king of the Persians, army was preparing, having in mind all tain Helada, all Greece. What did he have in mind? He was having in mind, again we have to, usually in English, a separate sentence. he was having in mind, and again, even though that's present, because this is past, the main verb is past. So all participles are then looked at, you look at it in terms of aspect. The main verb is imperfect, so he was preparing. So while he was preparing, the on would almost be was king. So when Xerxes, who was king of the Persians, that's another way to say this, because on is same time as the main verb, and he was having in mind, not he has in mind, because he has to agree with this in aspect. He was having in mind all of Greece. What did he want to do? This is an accusative form. He wanted to katastrepsastai. He was having in mind to do something. Usually that takes an infinitive. Was having in mind to, and you can look down here, katastrepsastai. A very interesting infinitive. This is actually a future middle infinitive. And you think, why in the heck is it that? Why is it future middle? Because he was having in mind to do something in the future. This is what's great about Greek, is you can actually write this out. He was having a purpose in mind that hadn't been accomplished yet, so it's really a future act. So he was having in mind at the same time he was preparing to do what? To subdue, but it's really about to subdue. It would be he was having in mind to about to subdue all of Greece, but we say just to subdue. And we know that it's a future because it hasn't happened yet. But in Greek, all you're doing is you're putting a future infinitive. But I have to take that back because we have an alpha here, and although I was correct in saying that this is a different occurrence, this is katastrepsastai, so it's actually an aorist infinitive, which means he has the intention of doing this in the future. This is a one-time occurrence, meaning he wants to subdue them right now at this moment. He was having in mind to subdue them now, is another way to. So if this was an epsilon, sorry I made that mistake, so this is a good teaching point here. If this were epsilon, then yes, he would have in mind he was wanting to subdue them in the future. But this is making the point that he wants to do this right now. He was having in mind to subdue all of Greece, pasan tein halata, now, right now, one time, not over time, but right now. So this is the sastai, the sigma's buried in there, and the alpha tells you that it is an aorist middle. It can only be middle because there's an aorist passive, which is different. So this is an aorist middle infinitive, meaning he wants to subdue them in terms of aspect, meaning once, right now, at this moment. And again, I apologize, I said it was a future. It does look like a future infinitive because of that psi, but I missed the alpha. It is an alpha, and that means aorist, so a alpha aorist. If it were epsilon, it is definitely a future, but this is not. It's aorist. I wish they would have said that down here, but again, you have to look out for that. So he wants to subdue all of Greece, detain halada. Hoi, ton helenon, protoi, sun elthan. So this is a continuing sentence. So this is probably meaning while, because you are continuing with hoi ton helenon protoi. So the hoi of the Greeks, the first, the generals is one way. It's the first people, the very first men, the top men, you can think of it that way. So the generals came together, soon Altan. So while Xerxes, king of the Persians, who was king of the Persians, was preparing his army and having in mind to subdue all of Greece, the hoi protoi, the generals of Greece, of all of Greece, ton Helenon, came together, soon Eltan, that's an aorist, you know Eltan is in second aorist. You know this is not imperfect because this is a second aorist, you must know this one. Eltan is from erkomai. Came together Estain Corinthon, where in Corinth. Kai Eskopun, and something, and you're thinking I've never seen this form before, and you may be correct. This is a contracted imperfect, and you're like, okay, how did we get there? So remember, imperfects forms end in, they have an augment, but they end in omicron nu. So omicron nu, because this is plural, and here you have an example here, but this is aorist, but this is not aorist, this is a imperfect, and it's a contracted form of the imperfect. You have a scopun, and the scopun part, if you drop the augment and you drop this part, you know scopio. So it's an epsilon contract verb, which you can review in previous lessons. But this is what you got to look out for. So anytime you come across a funny looking verb, so scopeo, epsilon contract. What this really is a scopeon. Again, it's really looks like this. It's a sco. And that comes from the epsilon. It's an epsilon contract. So it's os es scopeon. So that would be your normal secondary ending, omicron nu, epsilon, augment, and then the accent would be here. Escopeon. Now epsilon omicron contracts in Attic, although you can see this in Homer. It's even written like that, scopeon, and you have un. So epsilon omicron becomes u. So this is going to be a form that's going to confuse you. You're going to wonder where it's from. You just got to look out for the nu and the epsilon. That will help you. This is imperfect. So we're considering at a loss, or you could say, so looking up the word here, so Scopio, so we're considering, or we're looking out, or we're considering, so they were considering the hoi protoi, sunaltan, came together in Corinth, and were considering T-day, what was necessary. They pratain. T-day pratain. So, and we're considering what was necessary to do. Pratain, to do. And day always takes an infinitive. They were considering what was necessary, what is necessary. So de can be used as something that must be done. Like, I must do this. It is necessary for me to do this. You would say de, because it's third and it's an impersonal verb. You would say de, then to me with the dative moi, moi, de moi. It is necessary moi for me, de moi, pratin, to do this, tuto. So de moi pratin tuto. So kai eskopun, contracted, epsilon, contract verb, imperfect. We're considering, or we're at a loss about what it was necessary to do, pratin, infinitive. Polun de chronon, e porun. So and, it always comes second, and for a long time, accusative of duration of time, polun chronon, and for a long time, or during a long time. Again, you're like, what is this? This is the key part. Again, it looks like this, and that is, again, another, and I believe this is an alpha contrast, aporia. So aporia is a famous word coming out of Plato to describe Socrates. And aporia means like a confused state, or to be confused. So you would have to know that that eta is an augment of an alpha. So aporia. So alpha and then pi, so aporia. So we find that. So aporeo. Aporia, I'm thinking of the actual noun, that's perplexity, he aporia. The verb is aporeo, so it is an epsilon contract again. So aporeo is I am at a loss, but aporia, he aporia, tes aporias is derived from aporeo, meaning I'm perplexed, there's a perplexity or a state of being at a loss. So aporeo, again, another epsilon contract. But this case it has an alpha, so that then gets augmented to eta. So we have eporun, looks just like this because it's an epsilon omicron contract u, so they were at a loss. Who's this referring to? This is referring to hoi protoi. And so they were at a loss. So medzonagar straton, ekain hoxerxes, e pantes hoi Hellenes, kai planos nas. Okay, verb, first verb, ekain. Somebody was having, this is again an imperfect augmented form of echo, which means I have, and has a special augment a, not eta, but epsilon iota. It's a special augment, and there's a reason for it, but I won't go into it at this point. It just means I was having, or somebody was having. Who, Hoxerxes, was having a straton. But what kind of straton? A medzona straton. For a medzona straton, a better army maybe, or a larger army. So medzona is actually a adjective, a comparative. It's an irregular comparative adjective coming from megas, megale, mega. You have to look in your book for the charts, but we'll go over this later for a review. I'll go over the irregular comparison of adjectives. But medzana comes from medzon, medzan, which means bigger, larger, greater. So it's not megas, it's medzan. It's bigger, but if it was biggest, it would be megistos. And again, they're all declined depending on which case, number, gender, all that. But have special declension in some forms, some parts. So medzana is a third declension accusative form, and that's because the comparative in this case, because it's irregular, it just happens to be third declension. So medzana straton, so it has a bigger for bigger army he was having Xerxes. And then when you see a usually with a comparative adjective, so a bigger army, you would say bigger army he has than. This is the than that we would have in English. You know, he has a bigger house than me, or they have a bigger car than those people. So this is the then, the it's not he. So then all of Greece, or all Greece, Pantes, hoi Hellenes, kai, and you're just continuing this comparison. He has pleonas nous. Pleonas is a comparative, meaning more, comes from much, many, positive form, but the comparative is more, coming from pleon or pleon, and the neuter is pleon or pleon. So this is pleonos, which is neuter. But actually, because it's describing nous, which is feminine, this is, because it's third declension, then this is just the third declension form of pleon, or pleon. So it's pleonos, because the stem is on. So pleonos, nous, has more ships, nous. And you're like, why is it pleonos? Because it's an accusative and it's plural. And so it has to agree with the number, case, and gender. And if you can go in the back of the book. If you just look at third declension endings, you know, you have, so it's in your book, you can see pleon or pleon, pleon, and the pleon is third declension. So then you would say, what is it as a genitive? The on becomes on, so it's pleonas, pleoni, pleona, like medzona, pleona. Then pleones, pleonon, pleonisen, or plesi, and then pleonas. We'll review some of these again. In a second here. So I wanted to show that declension of pleonos. So pleon, because it's feminine, would be pleon. And again, I'll show you this later. but it would be pleon, not pleon. But this is how they're declined. So pleon, and then the stem is pleanos, pleani, pleana. That's where you get medzona. Pleanes, pleanon, pleosi, pleonas. So pleonas, nous, because it's masculine, feminine, they're the same. If it were neuter, it would be pleona. Then you have medzona straton. This is masculine. So medzona, accusative singular, medzona. It could also be medzol. You can have an alternative form, so you got to be on the lookout for that. Anyway, so a better or bigger army than all of Greece, all Greece, and more ships. More ships is how that would be translated. And you obviously don't need the article here. You don't need hey nous or tas nous. So telos de, and finally, telos de, edoxen altois tous barbarus amunein entais thermopilas. And finally, edoxen, he was like, he's the one way, there's a couple ways to translate this. So he seemed, so I have to look this up. So edoxen, so it's doke. He seems, it was seeming good, something like that. It was seeming, and finally it was seeming, and so you need a dative, and that's the altois there. So it was seeming to them. So we're just finishing this sentence here. So finally it appeared, or as it seems to them. Again, this refers back to the protoi. It seemed to them, what? The barbarians to check, to hold back, to ward off in the hot gates in Thermopylae. So again, you're just continuing the idea from the previous sentence. Eke, there. Eke means there. For there. Kata, men, gain, along the earth or along the ground. Something like that. Along the earth, the gain, the ta hore, the mountains. You could say something like that. Along the ground. So they said, so for there by land or by the earth, the mountains lie. So ta hore, the mountains, which is it's a special noun, so you just have to look that one up. Ta hore. The mountains, what? They lie prosketai, so they lie, which takes a dative, so lie close to. So ta ore so, that's an adverb. It's hutos turned into an adverb. So not this, but thus or in this way or so. Prosketai, so these mountains along the earth. Prosketai takes a dative. They lie near the te thelate. So they lie near the sea. They lie close to the sea. That only a few men can fight against many, and the sea there are narrow straits between Euboea and the mainland. So thus, hoste, you could say, that few oligoi, few pros polus against many, dunantais means I can, or I am able, or they are able. It's antai, so it's third person plural. It's a special form of a verb. We'll look at that later. It just means I am able, they are able. So they are able. Who's able? The oligoi. This is a substantive, an adjective being used as a noun. So the small, the few, against pros polus, against many, can or are able, makestai, to fight. And kata thalaton, along the sea, and along or by the sea, there are something, or poroi, straits, are, ac, stenoi, the straits are narrow, along the sea, en mesoi, in between, tes te eubias, kai tes eperu. So between, and you have a te and a kai, so you could say between both Eubias and Eperu and the mainland. So Eperu, tes Eperu is the mainland. So why is it genitive? En mesoi, if you remember from your vocabulary, if you look 14a vocabulary, you will see that en mesoi or en mesu takes a genitive. So in between of Eubias and the mainland. So mathantes un hoi Hellenes, therefore hoi Hellenes, the Greeks, thinking mathantes, and this is actually an aorist participle because this is a second aorist, and if you remember, second aorists take present participle forms, but it's still aorist. You know from the stem, math. A mathan means learning, sorry, not thinking, learning, like a student, like a mathetes, whole mathetes, whole mathetai. So mathetai are learning, mathematics, think of math. So learning, they learning, again participle, after, so because it's aorist, has the aspect means after, they learn. So after something, after learning what? That Xerxes already prostain Helada, towards Greece, poreuetai. Now, this is tricky because you have a aorist participle, and then you have hoti, which is really, it's introducing indirect statement. So they were learning something that, because the participle is aorist, then the way you translate the verb, it's sort of opposite what you normally learn. So as a main, if it were a main verb, so this is not a main verb because you have hoti. Hoti is telling you it's like a different type of a sentence, another part of the sentence, a separate part, indirect statement. But now this is using a participle, and the participle has aspect, which is aorist. And what it's saying is that because this is present, poreuetai, it's a deponent verb, So it's present tense, meaning he is traveling, he is something like that. He's traveling, or he's marching, something like that. So if you were just to read this straight, you would say, having learned, the Greeks having learned, therefore, that Xerxes already towards Greece is marching. That wouldn't make any sense. Kai dialigu, and in a little time, Aestes Thermopilos, to the hot gates, the Persians, whole Persia, will arrive. It wouldn't make sense. You would have to say, having learned, the Greeks having learned that Xerxes was marching towards Greece, and soon the Persians would arrive. And again, this is a future form of the verb, plural, with Persia. The Persians will arrive. That's what it says. The Persians will arrive into the gates soon. But when it's reported as indirect speech, again, this will become clear later, and this is always a hard concept. It's saying, just forget this is even a participle. Let's say the Greeks learned, let's just say it's a matin. The Greeks learned that. What did they learn? They learned, because this is secondary sequence, it's called, meaning this is a past tense verb. The Greeks learned that Xerxes was marching, and the Persians would arrive. That's how you would translate it. Because you don't want to say, the Greeks learned that Xerxes is arriving or marching, and the Persians will arrive. The Greeks learned the Persians will arrive. It doesn't sound right. In English, you would say the Greeks learned that the Persians would arrive. And it's called secondary sequence. When you have a past tense verb, even though it's a participle, it's still a verb. It's past tense, it's aorist. The Greeks, therefore, having learned that Xerxes was marching and the Greeks would arrive. This is really showing aspect. Present, meaning at the same time as this, so was, and future, meaning would, not will, but would, meaning a past tense, future. Would. If this were primary sequence, this would be present tense, learning. So, methanontai. So the Greeks learning, therefore the Greeks were learning, or something, the Greeks learning. The Greeks are learning that Xerxes is marching and the Persians will arrive. That's primary. But secondary, the Greeks having learned, aorist, that present happening the same time as aorist, so was, and future happening after aorist, would arrive. Again, this is easy to miss and it's quite complicated, but it's how it would be translated. And because this is made up Greek, this is not really getting it straight across. It's when you're reading authentic Greek, you actually see this a lot more, and it makes more sense because you see a lot of examples. And usually this is not a participle. This seems odd to me when I see this, a participle introducing indirect statement. It doesn't seem correct to me. Usually it's a main verb, and then, but it's just making the point that it really shouldn't matter. But it is an odd way of saying this. It's not how I would see it. But the point is you really ignore the participle It's what is the tense, the aspect. It's aorist. And you have that hoti there. That's the key thing. That means that. Okay, enough of that. So ton. So they learned that they would arrive, the Persians would arrive at the hot gates. That's aestas thermopoulos, accusative. Ton Leonidain, accusative, they sent. And this is aorist, as the alpha, as the nu, as the epsilon augment. Aorist, there's the sigma in the psi. A pempsan, they sent. So having learned, they sent. So theoretically, you could say the main verb is apepsan. This is actually makes more sense now. Take ton leonidain, apepsan, and put it up here. Ho Helenes, un, ton leonidain, apepsan, mathantes, having learned that. So here you have your true past verb, apepsan. And then that just here would mean after learning, they sent. Basileia, who's this? Basileia, it's referring back to Leonidain because it's accusative. Anta, again, accusative, participle being king of ton Lacedaimonia. Hepta Kiskilius, which just means 7,000 down here. Nothing we would be expected to know, but hepta means 7, so at least you should know 7. Hepta, hepta is even in English, hepta, heptagon. So hepta kiskilios, ekanta, having 7,000, hoplitas. Ekanta is accusative participle of eko, I have. Hutoi de afikomenoi. So this is actually a substantive, it's an article, it's a demonstrative, meaning those, these. So those, these people, them, the Lacedaimonioi. Akfikomenoi, having arrived, arriving. Look for the main verb, paraskuadzanto, were arriving. So imperfect. So those men, because it's masculine, those men were arriving, or you could say these men arriving at Thermopylae, after arriving at Thermopylae, aestas Thermopylos, were preparing, or prepared to ward off Amunain, tous barbarus, so the barbarians, and how would you translate te helade? So you would say, well, they want to ward off the barbarians. And if you remember amuno, you have accusative and you can have dative. Dative means to ward off X from. So dative is from. So from te helade, Greece. So Helenos is Greece, and Heladi, Helenos is Greeks, so we don't want to get that confused. Let's look up Greek. So Greece is, so we have Hellas, so Hellas, and then tes Helados. So the Helad is the stem, and then E, so it's third declension. So te Heladi, and it tells you it's dated. So continuing, O Xerxes, Apikomenos, Estastena straton, ekon, megiston de, tetaras men, hemeras he sukadsen, el pidzegar tus Helenas, apo peuxestai, idantas, to pletos tu stratu, te de pempte, hemerai. Or if you don't like the iota subscript, te de pempte, hemera. Hoigar Helenes, eti akinetoi emenon. Ton straton e calusen, eltus pros balein. Hoi de Helenes, andreotata, makomenoi tus barbarus, he munan. Talos de ho basileus tus persas, e pepempsen us athanatus ekale. Andreotatus ontas ton stratioton. Elpitzon tutus geraidos ni kesen tus Helenas. Epe de kai hutoi sun ebelon. Uden amenon e praton e hoialoi entois stenois makomenoi kai u dunamenoi toi plete or to plete krestai or krestai. Hode basileus tein makein theomenos tris anedramen. Hos legosin ectu thronu ho bumenos hupertu stratu. So ho de Xerxes and Xerxes afikomenos, so a participle. You should be very comfortable with these now. This is a participle nominative form modifying the subject. So Xerxes arriving or having arrived, something like that. This is a second aorist participle, afikomenos. So after arriving, eis ta stenas, so into the straits, the stena, straton, ekon, having an army, megiston de, at least larger, biggest, having the biggest army of all, indeed, something like that. Teteras, that's, you should know this number is 4, so teteras men, hemeras. This is an accusative of the number teteras, hemeras. You see a number usually written in accusative with a day or some type of something that relates to time. It's called accusative of time of duration. So it really means 4 days, something like that. They did something, so here's the main verb. They hesukadzen. You could say they, it's like they rested or they sort of waited for 4 days. Hesukos or hesukadzao usually means like I enjoy. Again, we can look this up. And so if we look up hesukadzao, hesukaso, hesukasa, here it means I keep quiet. I have seen it mean to enjoy or rest. It obviously means rest as well, sorry. So resting, something like that, you're enjoying your like leisurely time. I've seen it used in those contexts. So they're resting is basically the point here. This is hesukadzen, so this is an imperfect form because the aorist is hesukasa. And again, you should know this is imperfect because you have the zeta still present and the n ending epsilon nu with an augment. So they were resting for 4 days. So after arriving, so this is an aorist participle, so you would say because of the main verb is imperfect, it would be after arriving, that it happens before the main verb. After arriving, they rested, something like that, for 4 days. Alpize, this is meaning to hope or I hope. Here it's again imperfect because the regular form does not have the augment, and it also ends in an epsilon. So if we just look that up, we can find that alpizo, so we look up alpizo, alpio, and then elpisa, this is in the vocabulary. I hope, I expect, I suppose. So it's definitely not aorist, it doesn't have the sigma, and it doesn't have typical aorist ending. It's augmented, so they were hoping what? The Greeks, the tous Hellenas, this is accusative, apopheuxestai. So before I was saying the one verb I had made a mistake on, saying it was a future infinitive, which actually it was not, but this is actually a future infinitive because it has the sigma embedded in this xi, and it has an epsilon. So that we know definitely this is not an aorist. This is a future infinitive. And so if you come down here, it has it's termed secondary sequence, not secondary sequence, but I mean it is secondary sequence, but it's indirect speech. So they were hoping that the Greeks would flee. So you might think, well, how in English we really have a hard time with participles. So the way to see this is, first of all, this is a past tense verb. This is imperfect. So they were hoping something. They were hoping, and when you hear of a verb like they were hoping that, or I know that, or I knew that, or I see that, that's introducing some type of indirect speech. It's indirect. It's not coming from the person because they're hoping that something will happen indirectly. So they're hoping that, and you don't see a that here. And that's why you actually have to supply it. So that the Greeks, so this becomes then an accusative infinitive construction. You'll hear more about this later. But you have a verb of indirect speech, I hope, that accusative, the Greeks, tous Hellenas, and then you have this future infinitive, and then because it's past tense, you have to translate it as past, which would be would flee. If this were elpize, they hope that, that he was hoping that, elpize, he was hoping that the Greeks, this would be the same, will flee. So this would be will flee, not would flee. It would be the same infinitive. It's a future infinitive. Remember, it has aspect. So it has aspect in relation to this verb. And this is what makes reading Greek hard, because if you don't get the verb at first, which sometimes you know it could be at the end like this one, you really have to read all the way through to understand the relation of this, say, this participle. But generally, if this is an aorist participle, it's time before, so you can translate it as having arrived or after arriving. Here, you literally have to read really quickly, and then you can translate. Say, they were hoping that or he was hoping, so he, Xerxes, again is referring back to Xerxes, was hoping that the Greeks would flee seeing. So idontos is a participle. Again, this is idontos is a aorist participle. It's second aorist, coming from the stem id, and that's really the only way you're going to know this, is id is a second aorist. Adon would be the aorist, meaning I saw. But idon, you lose the augment, so this, even though it's present, it's actually aorist, so then this would be after seeing. So then he thought, Xerxes thought that, or hoped that, the Greeks would flee after seeing to plethos to stratu. So, and I think anyone would flee if they saw the huge army or the plentiness of the army. You know, that's one way to translate. You could say, so you could say that, for he was hoping that the Greeks would flee when they saw, or having seen, or after seeing, the multitude of his army, the hugeness of his army, something like that. And plethos, again, it's probably in the vocabulary. I'm going to look it up in the back. And again, I just want to make a point about how I teach. I like to teach on the spot. Of course I prepare, but also I teach as if I'm in a classroom. I may page through a book or look something up. It's not going to be perfect like, say, there's some Latin videos where the guy is really professional and perfect, and it's almost like he rehearsed it, and that's great, and I like it, but my style is I like to teach as if I'm really there. So I may page through a book, I may pause, you may not like it. This does make the videos a little bit longer. I hope you do get through them, but it's a learning experience for all of us. So plethos, plethus, to plethos is number or multitude. So the multitude of the army, they are having seen that. So another note on the pronunciation, if you haven't listened to earlier videos, I do try to pronounce the iota subscript. Some people don't like that. So I try to do both. Sometimes I may not do both, but the point is there are multiple ways. So you could say te, de, pem, te, hemerai, or hemerai, or te, de, pem, te, hemera, which some of you sure love that. It depends on the time period, classical time. They did pronounce the iota subscript, as many of you heard me talk about already. So I try to be fair and say both. So te, de, pempte, hemerai, te, de, pempte, hemera. So if you have a dative with a time span, so 5 days, this is on the 5th day. So you already have a duration of 4 days here. This is accusative, but when you have dative, it means like on the spot. Think of the iota digging into the ground. That's how I think of it. It's on the spot, the dative. You're digging in the ground. That's the time, on the 5th day. So on the 5th day, te, pempte, hemerai, hoigar Hellenes, eti akinetoi emenon. So for the Greeks, main verb remained motionless still. Think of kinesis. Kinesis means to move, and think of kinetic. Kinetic energy is moving energy. Potential energy is not. So if you have akinesis or akinetor, you have unmoving things, hoi, plural, so they're not moving. And again, unmoved here, it's glossed, of course, but I just want you to see the words. You can see them. Is a alpha primitive. It means the opposite of what this word means. Try to find the meanings of the word. Ton straton. So he ordered so this is an accusative, the army he ordered straight away, ethus, in straight away, prospalein, to attack. Again, going back to our vocabulary here, prospalein, we've already said that, it means to attack plus dative. In this case, they're not attacking anyone, they're attacking the Greeks, but that's already understood. So he ordered the army to attack straight away. And again, this actually is an accusative infinitive construction. He ordered that the army, accusative, infinitive, to attack. Or say he ordered that the army attack. That's one way, and it's buried in there, but again, you get used to this accusative infinitive after a verb of commanding or verbs of knowing, seeing, pondering, thinking, feeling. I feel that. I see that. I know that. I order that. And expect an infinitive, usually some type of an accusative. So he ordered, that is Xerxes again, ordered that his army attack. And it would be his army probably, or the army is another way. Ton in Homeric times was considered a possessive adjective, so it would be his army. Now in Attic times it's a the. Hoi de Hellenes, so the Greeks. Andreotata, so bravely, most bravely. Again, this is a superlative adjective. You know that because it has the tata. When you see this tata, this is a superlative, not adjective. It was an adjective. It's turned into an adverb. This is an adverb. So they fought most bravely. Makomenoi participle, so I translate it as a finite verb, but in this case it's a participle, so you could say, and the Greeks fighting most bravely, the barbarians, tus barbarous menon, they checked or warded off the barbarians fighting bravely. Finally, telos de, to finally, ho Basileus, the king, the Persians, he sent so pempsen. He sent them in, or so remember epipempo means I send against or I send in. So this is the augment is here. So epipempsen. So he sent in the Persians. So which Persians? The Persians whom. This is whos. This is a relative pronoun whom because it's accusative. And in English we don't really have that. We can say whom. Most people would say who. But in this case it is whom. So whom Athenaze ekale, whom he called the deathless ones, or you could say the immortals. And we have a picture of those later on. I'll show you from the movie 300. So the Athenaze, so he called them, or they are called the Athenaze, whom are called Athenaze. That's where the whom is. So just take the sentence by itself. They are called, or he calls them the deathless ones. You can see it's in quotes. And finally the king sent in the Persians that he used to call immortals, who were being the bravest of his soldiers, expecting that these at least would easily conquer the Greeks. So Andreotatus, that's describing the Athenaze. And how do you know? Because it ends in us. And again, this is a superlative adjective. Again, if you should have reviewed this in your grammar, but we will go over it again. It's o tatos, and then you would do o tatus to match case number and gender. So being called Athenaze, Athenaze immortals Andreotatus ontas of the army Stratioton. So being most brave of the army. This is describing this, and then this is describing this. He hoped, or was hoping, this is a participle, so he was hoping, tutus, which is referring back to them, that these, at least, so these, this is plural of hode, or hutos, sorry, hutos, so plural these, so not this, but that these guys here, the Athenaze, at least easily, most easily, or more easily. This is a comparative, again, adjective. It's an irregular, and we'll go over these. Would easily conquer the Greeks. So again, looking back here, we have a verb of hoping, but it's a participle. So it introduces indirect statement with accusative and an infinitive. And in English, we would have to make a separate sentence, say he was hoping, and you literally have to go back to the main verb, which is back one page. Let's go back. So he sent in the Persian. Let's just make this simple. Finally, the king sent in. Let's just skip the Persians. He sent in who? He sent in the Athenaze, the immortals, most brave of the army, and he was hoping. Remember, this is at the same time as the main verb, which is past tense. So he was hoping that they, or these immortals, would conquer easily the Greeks. It's similar to the previous construction which we have down here. He was hoping the Greeks would flee. So again, you should get it because you have a future infinitive, right? There's the sigma. You have a verb of hoping. Okay, it's a participle, but Greeks like to use participles, so it would be, that he sent them in and was hoping that they would easily, and you would have to fill in with a finite verb, hoping that they would easily conquer the Greeks. Or was hoping, Xerxes was hoping, again this refers back to Xerxes, it's a present participle, but think of the aspect, compare it to the main verb. So present participle is same time. Remember your sequence of tenses. Present participle, same time as main verb. Was hoping that, so there's the future infinitive, would conquer. Again, constant seeing this, you'll get it. It's a little difficult at first. We're not used to infinitives. You could say hoping So literally translated, hoping that these at least easily to be about to conquer the Greeks. Okay, epe de kai, and or since even those or these something. So epi can mean since. So you could say but. You can also use but when these two join battle, and kai here is actually means two or even, and so but even when or even but when these two join battle, but when these two two T-O-O, but even when these guys, meaning the Athanatos, the Athanatoi, soon Lamban join battle, okay, epide kai hutoi soon e balon. So when these guys, Athanatoi, hutoi, joined in battle, uden amenon e praton. So not one better a praton. So not one, and a praton means prato means I fare. So they so no one or not one fared better is what they're saying then. So again we have a comparative amenon, better. So you would expect almost a he meaning better than. So but when these two joined in battle, they were faring no better than the others. So they epraton, imperfect. So we have prato, praxo, epraxa. So this must be imperfect because it's epraton, preserving the present tense prato, and then you drop the omega, add on, omega nu, add the augment. So they were faring, none of them were faring better than hoi aloi, the others. En tois stenois, so in the straits, en tois stenois, makomenoi, fighting, they were fighting, somebody was fighting. It's referring probably back to the Athanatus because it's plural. So fighting and not able. So we have two participles, so let's just bear with me here. So in the straits, fighting and not able, toi plethe, the multitudes, krestai. Remember, krestai means to use or enjoy. So they were not able to use. So they were not able to use. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Why? What weren't they able to use? They weren't able to use the plus dative, the numbers. So the toi plete. So fighting in the narrows and not being able to use their numbers. So they were faring no better than the others. Fighting in the narrows, stenois, plural. Fighting and not able the numbers to use. So you really go back to the main verbs here, sune, balon, e praton. So they were not able to fare better than the others in the straits fighting, and were not able to use their numbers. Remember, this takes a dative. These are present participles, So they're at the same time of the main verb. So they were fighting and were not able to use their numbers. That's how you would translate. Hode basileus tain makain. So the king, the battle, watching. So the king watching the battle 3 times. Tris means 3 times. Here it's glossed. Anedramon. So he stood up. As they say. Ektu thronu. From his throne. From the throne. But you would say his throne is better. Fearing. He fearing. Again, going back to Xerxes. For his army. Huper tu stratu. Huper can mean for his army. And here's a typical picture of Xerxes. They're usually sitting on the throne, rarely standing. Although when Darius, his father, was king, you see Xerxes standing behind the throne. In this case, we have Xerxes sitting here in the throne. And he raises anadramen ek tu thronu instead of en toi thronon. So grammar, comparison of adjectives. There's 3 degrees: positive, comparative, superlative. So we have something like beautiful is the positive, more beautiful, and most beautiful, or brave, braver, bravest. How do you form it in Greek? There's many ways. Depends on the type of adjective it is. I'll show you another chart that makes it a little bit easier as a whole. But let's first focus on first, second declension adjectives. Okay, you add teros, tera, teran, or tatos, tate, taton. Teros, tera, teran is the comparative, meaning more, something, or Tatos, tate, taton means most, something, or est. So to get the form of the adjective from the positive, you need to get the stem, and then you add that stem to these forms to make the comparative or superlative. So Andreos is the positive, meaning brave, and of course it's Andreos, Andrea, because there's an iota, so that's why it's a, not a, and then Andrean. You drop the sigma and you get the stem Andreo. And one rule is when you add the teros, tera, teran, or tatos, tate, taton, if so this is the ultima, this is the penult. If the penult is long, then this ultima becomes short, it's o micron. So you have Andre o teros, a on. Andre o tatos e on. And that's how it's formed, and you've seen this already in the reading. If you have, say, another adjective, kalipos. So kalipos is difficult, kalipos. Here it's eta, not alpha, and you say, why is that? Because it's not epsilon, iota, or rho. It's not previous before the adding of the feminine stem. When a alpha comes after, when an eta comes after an eta, iota, or a rho, like here it's iota, it becomes alpha, but stays eta otherwise. So we have kalape, but here again you drop the sigma to get the stem, which is kalapo. But the penult is short, it's e. So now this becomes long, which is omega. So you get kalapoteros, kalapotera. So now it's a because it's after a rho. On, so that will always be the case for these comparatives, because it's always after rho. And then here it would be a because it's not after rho, it's after a tau. So you have kalapotatos, kalapotate, not tata. It would only be tata if it were neuter and plural. So that explains why you have alpha here and eta here, because alpha here comes after a rho. Because remember, epsilon, iota, or rho, the eta changes into an alpha. So here's sort of the big picture. Again, if you have a first declension, second declension adjective, so we have sopos. You drop the S, sigma, you get sopo. The penult is short, so that means this is going to be long. So sopoteros, sopotera, sopoteron. And then you add tatos, sopotatos, sopotate, sopostaton. And even if there's a vowel, it doesn't matter. Just if it's short, then again it's long, so this is short, iota, so you have omega. Same, here's long, so now this will stay short, so denoteros. This is long, so this will stay short, drop the sigma, aldeloteros, aldelotatos. Now we have something a little bit different, and we'll go over this in the next slide. But when you have a third declension adjective, eudaimon, eudaimon, and it has the stem eudaimonos, that's the genitive, you would then use the stem eudaimon, eudaimon, from this, drop the os, omicron, sigma. So eudaimon, and then you add esteros, estatos. Here it's a little bit easier when you have an adjective that ends in s, third declension adjectives again. You use the neuter form, s, so sapes, and then you add teros, tatos. So sapes, teros, sapes, tera, sapes, teron, sapes, tatos, sapes, tate, sapes, tato. When you have adjectives ending in us, ea, it's a little bit trickier. You have to drop the us, ea, and you add eon and ion, and here istos, iste, iston. Sometimes you'll use the nominative stem, so you just use oku. The neuter nominative stem u. So in some us, they just add teros, tatos to the neuter nominative stem. So glucus would be gluku, and then it would be glukutatos. That mostly coming from Homer, honestly, but you may see it in some readings. We've already went over this. This is the declension of a regular comparative adjective. That's going back here. So eudaimon, eudaimon. But you may have an irregular comparative. We'll skip this and go to that. We'll come back to that. But here's the third declension adjective, alethes, alethes. We already went over this, but again, how it's formed. Take the neuter, alethes, and then add teros, tera, teron, or alethes, tatos, tate, taton, and you get the comparative and the superlative. Now, what happens when the stem ends in on? So you have sopphron, sophron, sound mind, prudent, self-controlled. Stem is sophron. Sophron esteros, sophron estatos. So the endings esteros, aon, estatos, aeon are constructed by analogy with alethesteros. So you use this as a rule, a guideline. But when you have a third declension adjective like this, you use the neuter again, but you add esteros, estatos to the stem. There are some irregular comparison of adjectives, notably these listed here. And that previous chart I was showing you the declension of these adjectives: aimenon, aimenon, kakion, kakion. Kalion, Kalian, Medzon, Medzan, Elaton, Elatan, Pleon, Pleon, or Pleon, Pleon. That's going back to this. That's how you would decline these. You have the on or eon, and then you add eon as the stem, and then it's this third declension endings: eonos, eoni, eona, eones, eonon, eosi, eonas. If there's no iota, it would be on, onos, oni, ona, like medzona, ones, onon, osi, onas. And there's some irregular forms. You can have beltiol for the accusative singular, or beltius for nominative plural. And that would also be the same for accusative plural, so you just have to look out for those. Again, ona contracts to beltiol, ona to eo, or o. Just be on the lookout for that. Look at this table every once in a while. But generally it's third declension endings. So positive, you have all the endings you would expect. It's now you get to the comparative. These are irregular. So agathos becomes amenon, which is better. Best is aristos, like aristocrat. So aristos, ariste, ariston. Kakos, bad. Worse is kakion, kakian. Worse is kakistos, kakiste, kakiston. Kalos, beautiful. You already know this word, noble. More beautiful, kalion, kaleon, or kalian. More beautiful. And then most beautiful, kalistos, kaliste, kaliston. And here's the famous quote, te kaliste, to the fairest. So to the most beautiful. So you just take the superlative, you decline it, you get the feminine form because it's to the goddesses. It's dative. You add the article te, to the fairest, to the most beautiful. Te kaliste, or te kaliste if you don't like the iota subscript. And in normal Greek, I think it's just kalisti. But these would all decline like regular adjectives you already know. These are all third declension. These are all first, second declension. Megas, megale, mega becomes medzon, medzan. And then megistos, megaste, megaston. Oligos, olige, oligon becomes elaton, elatan. And then oligos, oligistos, oligiste, oligistan. Polus, pole, polu, which is irregular, becomes pleon or pleon or pleon, pleon. You've seen this in the reading. And then most, great, very many, plestos, pleste, pleston. Here's those forms again, written out in shorter, more easily readable forms with some extra ones like radios. You get radion and raistos. Some are very irregular like that, or even takus, daton, which you see in Homer, and then takistos, which means quickly, most quickly, hostikastos, most quickly. So it's nice to try to remember some of the more common ones, but come back to them more frequently. As you read, you'll constantly come back to them, like I have myself. I don't normally, in the beginning, I never really remembered adjectives. I sort of ignored them, but they do come up a lot, and so you'll find yourself coming back again and again to these charts. So try to copy these charts if you can, put them in a book or buy a book that has them. Here we have the Judgment of Paris. Here's the golden apple being presented to Paris on Mount Ida near Assos, which is in Turkey now, near the Troad, which is where Troy is located. And it's near a small town called Akçay, where I was recently and it's very beautiful, and there are streams and springs everywhere there, and it literally looks like a place that this judgment would actually happen. And even in the ancient literature it's described that Paris is at a spring on Mount Ida, so it was magical to be there. But keep these charts handy. They will be helpful. Again, more charts. This is comparison of adverbs. This shows you how to convert an adjective to an adverb. So for instance, you would have Andreos. So the way to get the adverb from the adjective, is you would take the genitive plural form of the adjective, so Andreon. You drop the neuter, new, and you add sigma. And so instead of kalon, you have kalos, so beautifully. So Andreon becomes Andreos, bravely. And then you form the comparative adverb more bravely by dropping the os and adding oteron, or otata. Oteron is the neuter singular nominative for the comparative, and that's the only one you would use. It doesn't decline. And then for the superlative, you add the neuter plural otata. Again, following the rules otata or otata. What I mean is omega tata or omicron tata, depending on if this is long or short. But this again is indeclinable. It will always be otata or otata. And this would be oteron, oteron. Alethos, again, you drop the new and you get aletho, and you add sigma, alethos, truly. And again, the rules apply alethes teron, alethes tata. Again, non-declinable. Irregular ones, eu as well, like Eucharist, euthanasia. So eu, then amenon, arista. Kakos, kakion, kakista. Remember, these are all adverbs, so they don't decline. Polu, pleon, plesta, and mala, malon, malista. It takes use to get into seeing these. You could use also malon where it means rather than. So an example is ho papos buleto en toyaste menein malon oikade panelthein. So grandfather was wanting to stay in the city rather than going home. Other examples from the book: Medzana Straton, bigger army has Xerxes than all of Greece. Again, from the book, examples, it's good to go over them. Go over these by yourself, but these are, again, very straightforward. Just remember the A means then. Medson, bigger. Uden, emenon, no better than. So one thing is the genitive of comparison. Something it's hard to pick up, and it's usually glossed in many books as you read Greek further. Like here, you have a genitive ton alone of the others, you would think it would mean, but when you have a comparison like better, not better, you would just than the others instead of having the A. Superlatives, the genitive can be used with superlatives, so it's called a partitive genitive. So the best of all the soldiers. So aristos, of all the soldiers. So an adjective in the dative case can use to enhance a comparison. So by much, by further. Was bigger. Mezzona. This is called the dative of degree of difference, bigger by much. That's probably the best way to translate it, bigger by much. So mezzona, poloi, makroi. Bigger by much, by far. Hos takista, I said earlier, as quickly as possible. So superlatives with hos. Hos andreotata, as bravely as possible. Hos plestoi, as many as possible. As you can see, this is the superlative form here. Here, this is, these are all superlative forms, plural. Special meanings of comparisons and superlatives. So sometimes it can mean rather or somewhat brave, the comparative. So andreoteroi just means rather bravely. So the barbaroi rather bravely are, or are more brave, are somewhat brave. And then lastly, the athanatoi, hoi athanatoi, andreotatoi eisen. So the immortals are very brave, or most brave, you could say. How do you know it's most? Because it's ota, and then that's just plural. Remember, it's case number, gender, nominative, plural, masculine, ho athanatoi, andreotatoi, eisen. And there's an accent here because this is enclitic, meaning this, the accent from eisen leans on here, and that's why you see these two accents. It's not a mistake. We'll learn a little bit more about enclitics later. So you would basically keep raising your voice as you say a sin. So ho anatoi, andreotatoi sin. Again, I'm not going to claim that I know how to do that with my voice. I'm trying the best that I can. Don't expect me to speak ancient Greek like they did thousands of years ago. Really, nobody knows how, and I'm just hoping to instill the beauty of the language into people so that they may want to read on their own and speak and learn about the poets. So here's a poet, in fact, we can learn about today, Ἀρχίλοχος. You can pause this and read and learn about him, but this is also from the web, so you can read about him at your own leisure. But he was contemporary with Homer and Hesiod, and so his poems will have the language of Homer and Hesiod in there, so it won't look like Attic Greek. So you can pause this if you like. And then going on to the lesson. So Ἀρχίλοχος, when you look at his Greek, it looks quite strange, and that's because it's earlier than Attic Greek. And a lot of words are right out of Homer. I'll just give one example here. Reto, it means let it go. Reto. Homer uses this in the Odyssey. Ere, go. So just because I've read Homer, I'm used to seeing this. And so when I see this literally archaic Greek, it's a little bit more familiar. But with that said, there are a lot of words glossed for that reason, because it's quite, if you're reading Attic Greek only, then these words would be unfamiliar. So just going over the vocabulary, aspidi is a shield. Algelatai means to enjoy, with a dative. So it has to go with something. So this is dative here. So this will refer to that. We have parathamnoi, by a bush, parathamnoi. Entos, a weapon. Mon meton, blameless or excellent. That's an adjective used in Homer a lot. Here we have klipon, which means it's not kaliston. It's not meaning most beautiful. It's a rendering of katelipon, which means to like throw away or something like that. Alton is hemalton, meaning myself. Ex esausa means ex sosa from attic, meaning I keep safe. Timoi mele aspisekene. What do I care about that shield, literally, or why is that shield a concern to me? Erato, let it go. So there's a line for you to sing to the song "Let It Go." Now you know it in Greek. Erato, let it go, or let him go, or let her go. Exaltis just means altis or althis, again, or something like that. Kteresomai means I will get another. I will get another. You have to supply alein, which is another. Kakyo is just kakyona. So there's always variance when you look at other dialects of Greek. So reading it, aspidi men sion tis agalatai, hein parathamnoi, entos amometon, kalipon uk ethelon, alton dex esausa, timoi mele aspis sekene, erato exaltis te somai u kakyo. And so shield, so it says somebody enjoys my shield is what he's saying. So let's see here, some scion. A scion is a Scioi, or you can say a Thracian. It's usually translated a Thracian, but here we can say Scioi. So he says a cert. This is in. This is a tis can mean someone or something. So some scion, Scioi, because it's nominative. Some Scioi is enjoying a shield or my shield. And you can say this is a relative pronoun, which, referring to the shield, which by some bush, an excellent weapon, which, and you can have to really translate, I left, which I left by a bush, not willing. So we have to further read here. So, which by a bush, an excellent weapon, I left not willing. I was not willing to leave, something like that. I left not wanting. So okay, this is the aorist, so you could say kalipon, I left not wishing to leave, so that's a participle. So I left my shield by a bush, but I didn't want to do it. I saved myself, but I kept myself safe. So what do I care about that shield? So what is it to me, that shield is really how you translate it. What does it matter to me, that shield? Let it go. Exaltis, another, again, something like that. I will get, again, another one, no worse. So again, I will get no worse. There is no other here. Again, that's supplied. So he's really saying again, I will get no worse. This is the comparative, the kakiona. Remember, that's how it's declined. That's the accusative of kakion. So kakiona. And then again, the dialect changes it to kakio. And let's just go up. I remember I told you there were different forms of that. So if you go back to this chart, kakio. So we're looking at kakiona. Kakiona can be kakio. So that's where it's coming from. That's where that o is. That's the alternative form. And this is a famous poem by Ἀρχίλοχος because in Greek times people throwing away their shields were considered cowards, and so this was, considering Homeric times, that this poem was contemporary with Homer, really goes against the Homeric way of courage and kleos, which is glory. You would never throw away your shield in Homer. So throwing away your shield was an act of cowardness. So that's what makes this poem actually stand out. That's why it's important. Here's a fragment of one of his poems. So this is where they came from, fragments. But still, that's what also makes it poetry. He's thrown away his shield, he saved himself, and he can get another one, showing that life is more important. And in our own times, we, I think, can relate to this poem better than, say, they would in their time. So, kairete, and thank you very much for listening. Again, I would like to switch this channel to the Didaskalon, teaching place, on YouTube. Eventually I will switch over. Please consider donating for our school, and also check out this site, didaskalon.wordpress.com, for authentic Greek and Latin sayings and maxims to hopefully inspire your life. But again, going back to this donating, please try to, the money is really to, again, like I mentioned earlier, to get a group of people to go to Assos, which is where Aristotle went after he was at the academy with Plato. He married the daughter of the tyrant that was there, ruling there at the time. It's a beautiful place. I was just there. It's a great place to have a 1 week or 2 week school, teaching, reading Greek, learning. You see Lesbos right across the bay. Troy is nearby, so are the springs, Mount Ida, where the Judgment of Paris happened. So it's worth it, and consider maybe in the future going on a trip like that with me. We can all talk about this at another date. I definitely will post something later about what I'm planning to do. But there'll be more to follow, so karate.